I'd like to call to order the regular council meeting for the City of Springdale for January 15th, 2025. If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As we begin this council meeting, the second of the new year, let us take a moment to acknowledge the blessings of the past year and embrace the possibilities ahead. May we be filled with wisdom and compassion to navigate the challenges. As we incline our ears towards reason, apply our hearts to understanding, and seek knowledge we can use to find common ground among the residents for the betterment of all of our community. Thank you. All right, Ms. Brown, if you take roll.
Mr. Gleaves.
Present.
Mr. Jacobs.
Present.
Ms. McFarland.
Present.
Mrs. Seldom-Weisskopf.
Present.
Mr. Vanover.
Present.
Mrs. Webster.
Present.
Mr. Anderson.
Present. Council, in your package, you had the minutes for the January 2nd, 2025 meeting. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions, discussions, or changes? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes as published signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The minutes are approved with 7 affirmative votes. All right, we'll move on to committee and official reports. First up, Civil Service Commission. Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, Council. I'd like to report that the Civil Service Commission did meet on January the 2nd. Attending the meeting was myself, Robert Coleman, along with Ms. Kathy McNair, also Ms. Stephanie Morgan, Mr. Brian Ewell, Ms. Renita Edwards, in order to conduct the business. Following a disposition of the minutes were approved 2-0 in order to include those in the official record. Next up on the agenda were the reports, and the reports were as follows. We reviewed an update on the status of hires, and to that extent, the building inspector hiring position is still open and will remain open until filled. There are still applications being reviewed. Also, the patrol officer hiring position, that's in the background check. Police clerk hiring, that also is in background check. Public Works Inspector, that is also in the background check. And the Public Works Maintenance position has indeed been filled. So things are moving along fairly well within the hiring process for the City of Springdale. Also, under new business, Facilities and Grounds Superintendent position was presented. That was a timeline that was presented for approval. Following the discussion, the timeline for that particular position, the hiring timeline was in fact approved. Also, we discussed a request for reinstatement from a former employee, and that was Mr. Sam Fogle of the Tax Department. And following that discussion, the Commission also approved 2-0 for reinstatement, particularly now as we approach tax department time, they certainly don't want to be left shorthanded within the tax department. Following that item, that concluded the meeting, and the meeting was adjourned. Any questions?
Don't say any. Thank you, Mr. Coleman.
Okay.
All right, next, Rules and Law, Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rules and Laws Committee met just previously this evening. We called order about 6 o'clock. Council members Vanover and myself were present. Administration was there, including the mayor, Mr. Ewell, and Ms. Morgan. And Joe Brown was in attendance as well. And we discussed, I'll just kind of preface it, a bunch of miscellaneous items, so there's not really a flow to my report tonight. It was our first meeting, and we did address, the first thing we talked about was just to clarify that it is true that the Rules and Laws Committee doesn't typically address issues like this. We do also, and I'll skip to the end, we anticipate that to be our only meeting, depending on how things go tonight. But we clarified that jurisdiction issue. And then the rest of this is miscellaneous in fashion in terms of what we talked about. As we were going through the the code. We did check for vicious dog updates, in other words, to see if our language on vicious dogs maybe needed an update. Our charge was only, of course, on the number of dogs, but we did take a look at that. And as we discussed the idea of adjusting the limit of 2 animals, the 2 major ideas and directions we discussed were either maybe raising that number to 5, or we also heard from Mr. Braun, he's canvassed other cities. Nearly every city Mr. Braun checked has no number whatsoever. So our 2 options were maybe to go up to 4 or 5, or to have no number whatsoever. And we need our colleagues, input on that before we go much more forward in it. Mr. Vanover and myself, and he can speak to this, of course, as well, we lean more towards, keeping at maybe a 5 as opposed to having no limit whatsoever, even though that is apparently very common in Southwest Ohio. We noted that companion animals are excluded from whatever changes we make. We heard from administration in terms of, how their opinions, what their opinions are, and of course they could speak for themselves as well. But administration doesn't see a change to this number leading to a big change in how the city exists. So we don't feel like any changes are going to be mammoth that we may adopt going forward. It was noted that the code already has lots of mechanisms for things like noise, nuisance dogs, so there is lots of controls already in our current legislation. And we did, in general, the tone of the meeting included that if you have a problem dog, it's typically the owner as opposed to the animal themselves. Administration shared that there had been about 20 bite reports over the last 2 years, and we just kind of wanted to get a sense of how things were going in the city. Pretty minimal noise complaints overall in the experience of administration. And then there was a very small note that we noted. I was going through the code. Currently, if you're walking in a public park, you can't be walking more than 2 dogs. And we got into the weeds a little bit on that one. If council does see fit to raise the number, Mr. Vanover and myself seem to think that 2 dogs in a public park has its own rationality to it, and so maybe that's something we would keep. Beyond that, at the end of the meeting, it was kind of agreed that we're going to present to council just the idea of not even needing a future meeting. We want to get a sense of what our colleagues think on whether there's an interest in removing the number completely, as a lot of communities have done, or moving the number up to a 4 or a 5. And again, I don't want to speak for my colleague, but I lean more towards just simply raising the number and keeping a number. But those are the 2 options in front of council at this point, in terms of just discussion. And then based on what we hear from our colleagues, then we could move forward rather quickly. And that concludes my report, unless there's some questions or anything Mr. Vanover or administration would like to add.
All right, well, 2 questions. One question, then we'll talk about the process of moving forward. You mentioned companion animals. Is that the same thing as service animals? I know that has a special designation. Is that what you intended, or is there a different meaning to that? Mr. Braun?
Yeah, actually in Ohio, they don't have service animals. ORC calls them companion animals. Okay. So we're one of the, most states use the other term, but we call them companion animals.
Okay. In terms of process for how we move forward, because we are in committee and official reports, we're not actually debating legislation inside of this part of the meeting. And since we didn't know that we'd be having that discussion tonight, what I'd suggest is that we put the item back with this feedback in the committee on our next meeting under old business. That way council members can take a look at the code themselves, think about what they want to do, and then we can have a discussion about if we want to have legislation created then, as opposed to doing it off the cuff tonight. That's what I propose. Is there feedback on that, or in general, obviously the floor is open for anyone. Mr. Vanover.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is also an item that would have to go to planning. Mm-hmm. So both Mr. Jacobs and I agreed that, if we come up, council comes with a consensus, we can send that to planning, get their feedback, and then it would obviously come back to us, public hearing and all that. So we talked, and it's, totally up to you, but we could pull this discussion, open this discussion again in new business tonight, if, council is so pressed or so desires. Next meeting, it's not going to make that much of a difference, but I don't see a hard path on this one.
All All right, and again, the reason I was thinking to give us a beat for the next meeting is to have council have an opportunity to review the code themselves and have questions thought out. Ms. Webster.
I guess I have a couple questions. Why, when somebody comes up here and wants to change what we've had for yay many years, do we automatically put it on committee and automatically want to change it? I think 2 pets is fine. 2 dogs, 2 cats, 1 of each, whatever. Why do we have to go through with this all the time? That's my question. I think 2 pets in a household is fine. Now, I personally know people that have more than 2, but I'm not reporting them because they cause no problem. So why can't we just let things alone? Anybody? No answer?
Well, I think what you're finding is we're not having a debate on the topic.
Huh?
I think what you're finding is people aren't prepared to debate the topic of whether we should legislate in general from up here. In terms of, the reason I had thought it made sense, for what it's worth, if you want to hear it, is I support law and order in that means that there are people that do it, so we should have that discussion if it should change. We're one of the only communities that has a limit, so it seemed worthwhile to take that up as a topic. You're certainly entitled to your opinion that nothing should change, but that doesn't stop the business of council. Ms. McFarland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just was curious if there was anybody that's been here for a while that knows, was that ever changed at any point? Has it always been 2? Is there a reason it's 2? Thank you.
Mr. Vanover.
Actually, this topic was discussed a number of years back. I was involved in those discussions again. And I think it ended to stay where it is. One of the problems that we've seen it before us, that this is one of those rules that neighbors will use against their neighbors.
Yeah.
And I understand one side of it. I find it disheartening on the other. Is, well, in the committee meeting we were talking, it's pretty much the same thing as when somebody gets a letter from building department. They will go through their neighborhood and point out every perceived fallacy that exists, and it's the why me gene, I guess you would call it that. So I think that, well, I subscribe wholeheartedly to the late Barbara Woodhouse's philosophy that there are more bad owners than there are bad dogs. You know, and we've been through, well, we touched briefly on, you know, pit bulls, and I can remember when Doberman Pinschers were the bad dog. I remember German Shepherds being the bad dog. The problem, really, you boil it down, it becomes the bad owner allowing the dog. And it's, you know, we could project it over on a whole lot of other things, children and a whole ball of wax, but that is, in fact, the matter. And that's, there are, I have, I like Mr. Jacobs, lean to putting a number in there. I don't think the freedom, and again, this is not in stone, so it can be readdressed at any point in time. But my feeling is that I have no problem with increasing the number. I think there are more people with more than 2, and that could be more than 2 cats. It could be more than 2 dogs, or a combination of both. That's where we, you know, kind of ended. So it's not change for change's sake, but times have availed themselves that maybe it's time to look at it.
Thank you.
Ms. Webster?
Well, like I said, and like I think he just figured it out, we've had this rule for years, 2 pets. And everybody knows, everybody up here knows more per people that have more than 2 pets. And nobody is reporting them. And if they do get a report, then the authorities go. So I just don't see the need to change something. You're up here changing rules right and left from the way this community was made. Thank you.
All right. Anything else from rules and law? No. All right, then we'll go ahead and add to the discussion for the next meeting under old business, the feedback from rules and law regarding the domestic animal, and then we can decide as council if we want to request an ordinance or do something with planning. All right, next up, Finance Committee, Mr. Vanover.
No report.
Planning Commission, Ms. Sullivan-Weisskopf.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excuse me. Planning Commission met last night, and our first piece of business was a concept plan for 345 Glen Springs. They had come the month before about townhomes, and they originally were asking for 35 units, and now they want to knock that down to 23, and it'll be on, there's 2 properties, and it's going to be on the property that's not in the floodplain. It would eliminate the entire western lot. They were only going to be building on the eastern plot, and that it would, it's currently zone GB, and it would need to be rezoned if they decide to go through with this. They just came and talked to us about the changes that they made, and they will be back at a later date with an actual request. We also had Dave & Buster's PUD minor modification. Both myself and Ms. McFarland found it to be minor. What they want to do is paint the whole front of the whole building a charcoal color with an orange band and paints and have signage on top of it, and have new panels to replace the panels they currently have, and that was passed with a 7-0 vote. We had a residential treatment services come with a concept plan for 1171 East Kemper Road. It's the old art college on Kemper Road, and it was a concept only for a women's long-term facility for people who are needing mental health help, possibly who would need help with getting off of drugs, and also to help with homelessness. So that was just a concept plan, and they will be back if they want to move forward with that. And then finally, we had a thoroughfare, with the thoroughfare plan, and Mr. Sean Riggs came, and he was talking to us about it, and we had a presentation. And with the presentation, there were a couple changes that we had talked about, and he was making those. They will be a public hearing before Planning Commission on February 12th with the thoroughfare plan, and then we will vote to recommend or deny it to council, and then the letter will be sent to council on the February 19th meeting, and we'll go from there. And that was everything that we had, unless you have anything to add, Ms. McFarland?
Nope, that's all.
Any questions?
I don't see any questions. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Mr. Gleaves.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report.
Board of Health, Ms. McFarland.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Board of Health met last week on January 9th. We did have a final COVID update from last year. We ended with 229 cases for the year. That is obviously significantly down from 2020, actually the lowest year since then. But we did have a lot of discussion about the fact that a lot of COVID cases aren't reported anymore. So they have seen a few raises in the number in December, but overall it was still a lower number. We did have some food program updates. Obviously, Wawa's in process. A couple other places that are waiting on building department permits. The health department did have 3 of their employees take the ServSafe certification so that they can proceed with evaluations at local restaurants. They're waiting on the results for those. And they are continuing their emergency preparedness, additional training for the health department staff. The nurses' report was pretty short as well. We had no Narcan use in the month of December, and we had, that was it. February 13th is our next meeting.
All right, don't see any questions. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to capital improvements. Ms. Sullivan-Weisskopf.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
All right, next for OKI. The OKI Board of Directors did meet on January 9th. A few items of note. We received an update on the 471 bridge repairs. For people watching the news closely, you saw those large 100-foot long steel beams that were one of the key components that they were needing to get the repairs going. It's about a 100 by 40-foot section, and they're about 25,000 pounds each of those beams. These guys have been out there working every day since the accident, every day except for 2 days, New Year's and Christmas. That's it. Those guys have been working through that snowstorm up there, killing it to get that work done. But seeing those beams worked was something. If you have an opportunity to look for it, I think they'll be publishing pictures. It's pretty impressive, the damage that was done. They believe the damage was done by a shredded tire mix in the playground, along with pressure-treated wood, composite wood, burned hotter than they expected, closer than it needed to be or should have been. Also, I thought it was interesting, and maybe it's just me, if the actual damage had been just on the other side of that yellow curve of the bridge, it would have been Kentucky's problem. So it came right up to the edge of Ohio. Obviously, Kentucky's a partner in the bridge, and they've been working on it as well, but the ODOT representative at OKI, you could see his shoulders kind of sigh when we talked about where it become Kentucky's problem. So that was an update, and they're making good progress. They're still expecting March as the deadline, but there have been rumors that could be done as early as mid-February, which is very impressive considering the damage. The other thing of note is the TIP amendment was updated. That's that funding that we do benefit from frequently. Projects that were included in the TIP amendment there were projects in Levelland, changes to bridge work related to 471, EV chargers, safer streets for all grants were given out, streetcar real-time tracking, bus replacements, and bike pedestrian improvements in the city near Ezra Charles. If you've been down that way, you know those are very badly needed. Those are all approved at the meeting. The board then had administrative work nominating and approving the members for the coming year, and that was it. Our next meeting is February 13th. All right, unless there's any questions, we'll move on. Mayor's report, Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. First off, January 3rd, we had our annual Winter Sports Pep Rally and Coaches Memorial Hall of Fame induction. It was a great opportunity to recognize our two inductees. Richard Dick Nyer and Rusty Teague were inducted into the Hall of Fame. I actually played baseball for Coach Teague for a number of years. We had record snowfall on January 5th through the 7th. Our Public Works did an outstanding job cleaning our streets and getting out there. They started on Sunday the 5th around 11 a.m., so they were on the front end of it, out there treating the roads and getting the plows going. Did an excellent job. Kudos to Mike Hutzel and the crew down there at Public Works. I was out on Sunday when the snow started, went through a couple different communities on my way to the Butler County Jail, and it was noticeable on Sunday as well as being out on Monday morning, come in for a director's meeting, and Tuesday as well. Springdale was in much better shape than our surrounding communities. So again, big thanks to Public Works and all the work that they did and all the long hours through the night that they put in. Several great events going on down at the Rec Center that everyone should be made aware of. There's the Achieve Challenge, which is an 8-week program that runs from January 20th through March 16th. January 20th is significant because that is usually the point where people have broken their New Year's resolutions. So they're trying to start it up then to make sure people are engaged. It will be a focus on exercise 4 times a week, water intake, and having a proper diet. And people will set personal goals and they'll be looking to achieve, and that is free to the community. There's also going to be a Galentine's Day workout, which will be a free full day of fun, fitness, and friends, where essentially they're going to run from 9:30 in the morning until 8 o'clock at night, all of the variety of different classes that they have down at the Rec Center. So folks can come in. All those classes are free to the public as well. So you can come in down to the Rec Center and check that out. That's February the 13th. We also have, for veterans on Tuesday, January 28th at 9 a.m. and also at 6:30 at the Rec Center, there'll be a program to provide information about resources that are available for our veterans. So again, January 28th, 9 a.m. and again at 6:30 down at the Rec Center, program talking about some resources for the veterans. Lastly, there'll be a State of the City address. We're looking at March 26th at the Rec Center. Actually, that's not lastly. Lastly, I want to thank, and you guys will have before you information with regard to, there have been negotiations with the fire union, and I want to thank the men and women of our fire department, their negotiating team, and special thanks to our administrative negotiating team with Mr. Yule, Ms. Morgan, Ms. Edwards, Chief Stanley, Assistant Chief Williams. Everyone worked together to find a fair and sustainable agreement for this year's union. So that concludes my report, unless there are any questions.
Don't see any. Thank you. Administrator's report, Mr. Yule.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had a couple things logged down here, but the mayor described them much better than I could, so I have no further report. Thank you.
All right. Moving along, Law Director's report, Mr. Braun. And did the mayor take your steam as well?
No, I'll talk about other items, but thank you. I just wanted to report that we're currently combing through all the last-minute legislation approved in Columbus, looking to see what changes we'll need to be, bringing to you for revision. One that I know administration and the police department are both very excited about is the fact that beginning in April, unless there's any kind of challenge to it, we'll be able to begin to start charging for video requests that are made. While it's not intended to create a burden for people that want to get public records, it becomes a problem when we have these commercial requesters from all over the United States asking for all video related to X, Y, or Z. And it's not that we haven't been able to keep up with those, we have, but they're very expensive when it comes to staff time, resources, and redactions, and the state recognized that. So we'll be working to bring some kind of legislation before council to implement that on behalf of the city, should that continue through as law. The only other thing I would point out is that when you get to Resolution 6, 2025, I just wanted to be heard to give a little update on that before your consideration. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Just one question on the fee schedule. That does require council action. It's not an administrative rule.
That's correct.
Okay.
We would need to be a policy.
Okay. So you could consider this the request to do that in case you were waiting that formally.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
All right. Next up, engineer's report, Mr. Riggs.
Yeah, thank you. Just a few quick items this evening. We had the Tri-County Parkway Sidewalk project. That work is substantially complete. It was close to being wrapped up right before Christmas. Unfortunately, the snow caught them, so there's a few little things that they have to go back out there and clean up, but they're going to wait till the snow melts just a little bit more before going back out there. The East Kemper Improvements Phase 1 project, you may recall late December that we were authorized to begin work on that project. We were hoping to start surveying in January. We were, unfortunately, the snow caught us there as well. We've been able to do a little bit of deed research and some of the things on the front end. We have had a crew out there establishing control, but the bulk of the field work, the topo survey, is going to be on hold until some of the snow clears again. Then the Northland intersection realignment and Kemper Road shared use path. This is the OKI funded project that was awarded a couple years ago, where the city has an RFQ out for design services on that, and that actually all responses are due on the 17th at 4 p.m. and an ODOT scoping meeting is going to be held on January 22nd. That's all I had.
All right, don't see any questions. Thank you, Mr. Riggs. All right, next up, the Rental Program Committee, Mr. Vanover.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just kind of a reiteration of last meeting's report. The committee hasn't met since then, but we are anticipating that we will have legislation before council for our February 19th meeting for a first reading, and we will then have a public hearing set for March 5th for that second reading. And again, this, at council's desire, we could have more than two, but that's at this current point, we're figuring two.
Okay, just as a matter of process, so we'll have it on the agenda for the second February meeting, and then we can decide there to schedule the public hearing. So we're not asking to advertise that yet. Is that right? Okay. All right, I guess we might need to, though. I guess is the reason I'm asking. If you're doing the following meeting, don't you need the extra days, or are we okay? Mr.
Yes,
Gill?
we need the 15-day notice for the public hearing.
So we'd need to ask today to schedule, or the first February meeting, to schedule the public hearing, unless you just want to do that now. Right, because we can't ask for the public hearing on the 19th for the 5th. We'd have to do that on the first
Right. The 5th we can ask.
Okay.
So I would, Mr. Yule and I discussed, so they can meet the time window that we would go ahead and schedule that at this point, so we make our calendar.
And that's fine, unless anyone on council has any issue with that. I just want to make sure before we schedule public hearings that council's had a chance to weigh in on it. Anybody have concerns about having a public hearing on the 5th for the rules and law changes? Proposed changes? All right, good. Thank you. I just want to make sure we're good on process there. All right, any other questions on the rental program committee? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the Urban Farming Special Committee. Ms. McFarland.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
Thank you. Just one question on that. Is the committee planning to or wanting to address the other items that were in the charge? Specifically, I think Bs were the other issue, or should we look at disbanding it based on the feedback that we got with the first set of changes?
I don't think Mr. Jacobs and I have really had a chance to sit down and talk through that, but I can update you at the next second meeting in February.
Okay, so maybe that's
And
the
decide
ask
that.
is, let's go ahead and, if I could ask that we have a meeting and decide if you think the committee's work is done.
Yep.
So we can disband the committee if it's finished.
done.
Yeah,
Okay,
but if
will
you
do.
plan to do more work, you certainly have that in your charge.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's it for committee and official reports. Next, we'll move on to communications. Ms. Browder, are there any communications for council this evening?
No communications. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, next we'll move on to communications from the audience. This is an opportunity for anyone in the audience that would like to address council for any reason. Simply come to the podium, state your name and address, sign in, and you have up to 5 minutes to address council. The communications from the audience is now open. Second call. Third and final call. All right, at this point, I'm closing communications from the audience. We'll move on to ordinances and resolutions. Before we get started with ordinances and resolutions, Mayor Hawkins had mentioned a request to add a request for council to take up an item for the agenda. The chair will entertain motions to amend the agenda. Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to move that we add ordinance number 5, 2025 to the agenda, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with the Springdale Professional Firefighters, IAFF Local 4027, and declaring an emergency.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded to make a change to the agenda. Ms. Brown, I'm sorry, are there any questions or discussion about the agenda change? All right, seeing none. Ms. Brown, I'm sorry, did you have a question? Ms. Sullivan-Westcott.
At what point are we putting this? After the last ordinance then? Or after the last-
If it's approved, I would add it at the end of resolutions, at the very end of the section.
Perfect, thank you so much.
All right, Ms. Brown, if you poll council on updating the agenda to add ordinance number 05, 2025 with the emergency clause.
Mr. Jacobs?
Aye.
Ms. Sullivan-Westcott?
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves?
Aye.
Mr. Vanover?
Aye.
Mrs. Webster?
Aye.
Mus McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye. All right, the agenda's been updated to add on a 7-0 count, ordinance number 5, 2025 to the end of ordinances and resolutions. We'll do that after all the resolutions are complete. All right, back to the original published agenda. Next up is ordinance number 2, 2025. This is a second reading. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 2, 2025, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into a business incentive grant agreement with G5 Entertainment LLC. Whereas the city of Springdale, the city, has the ability to offer various economic incentives to businesses within the city, and whereas the city seeks to enter into a business incentive grant agreement with G5 Entertainment LLC as an economic incentive for locating within the city. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, that the mayor and city administrator are hereby authorized to enter into a business incentive grant agreement in the amount of $70,000 with G5 Entertainment LLC, the agreement. A copy of the agreement is attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3, this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the reading of ordinance number 2, 2025. It is a second reading and can be acted on tonight. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or discussion? Please. I think we have a presentation. Is that right? Mr. Kuchka.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Can you make sure that mic's on? I'm not sure if it was. Great. Thank you.
Slick City Action Parks is the actual operating entity that would occupy the space. Slick City Action Parks is a family entertainment business with 11 locations that have opened up since 2001, so it's a relatively new business, but it's growing very rapidly. You can see the states that they are currently operating in, multiple locations in Arizona, Colorado, Missouri, Texas, Illinois, and Wisconsin. There's 10 additional locations that are under construction currently. The basic operating model is they sell tickets for blocks of time, and you could take your kids or little kids, grown kids, adults, and you can use your block of time to go slide on all the different slides, and they have some other entertainment options inside as well. You can also host special events, birthday parties, things of that nature, and then they have special events that they put on periodically as for example, adult-only nights, after-hours glow, etc. So you can see this is a typical layout of one of their facilities. It's full of all kinds of very large slides, which surprisingly there are some patents that they've taken on some of these slides and how they work. So it's a pretty unique location. The specific location they're looking at occupying in Springdale is next to the Dave & Buster's in the Beltway Plaza. So it is the former Sam Ash location right here that's outlined next to the Dave & Buster's. It's a 39,000 square foot space, projected annual payroll of $750,000. There's a range of monthly visitors. I've been using our data that we subscribe to that tracks cell phone movement, and it's hard to get a read on some of the other locations because they're in much larger multi-tenant facilities, and some of them haven't been around that long. That's the low and the high end of what I've been able to see as far as monthly foot traffic going into these locations. The franchise owner that would operate this specific location is actually the same person who previously established and later sold our Sky Zone and Full Throttle location. So he's familiar with doing business in Springdale, wants to come back and do some more business in Springdale, and very excited about this project. The proposed incentive is a $70,000 grant payable within 90 days of their opening for business. There's a clawback requirement to repay the grant if operation ceases in Springdale within 7 years. That clawback is reduced by $10,000 annually until it goes away. This is not the layout of our specific location. They don't have the pretty version ready yet. There's a engineering version that would not be very helpful, but this is the basic layout of what ours is going to look like very closely to this. You can see they have 2 indoor basketball courts. They have the bulk of the slide areas. They have a soft play area, some more smaller slides, and some other entertainment areas. They have lots of picnic tables so people can bring in their food, their cakes, and have their birthday parties and have some rest time for the kids in between playing. And they actually, on the plan for the Springdale location, they actually do show a small arcade area as well. So this is a strategic incentive from our standpoint. It's just going to add to what's turning into a nice family entertainment hub in that Beltway Plaza facility. And there's one more that's being worked on right now that will hopefully be yet another addition in the coming months, but it's a little bit early to talk about it. But very excited to have this fill in a spot that hasn't been empty that long. They hope to start renovations in May and be open by December this year for business. There is a representative of the company here with us tonight if there's any other questions that I can't answer, but I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Ms. McFarland.
Maybe a little personal question for myself, but do they have concessions or food there, or you're just able to bring your own in?
Do you happen to know?
People are permitted to bring in their own.
Sorry, just for the record, could you come forward, state your name, and then answer the questions just so we have a record?
Sure. My name is Doug Mormon. I'm with Development Strategies Group located here in Cincinnati, and we do represent the company developing this site. They do encourage people very strongly to bring in their own food, but there will be limited food options available within the facility itself, as well as some beverage options.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Well, I'll tell you this, if I hadn't thrown my back out shoveling that snow, I'd be really excited about those slides. Now I'm starting to wonder if this is the right fit for me. But I am glad to see it as adding to the entertainment hub that we've talked about. I think it's a great opportunity to grow that space, especially in a large warehouse space like that. Those are increasingly difficult to fill. So I just want to say, we haven't voted, but I certainly appreciate you considering and staying in Springdale for this type of build out. It is appreciated. All right, any other questions or discussion? All right, seeing none. As we do with all of our changes, Ms. Browder, if you would poll council on ordinance number 2, 2025.
Ms. Sullivan-Meiskop.
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves.
Aye.
Mr. Vanover.
Aye.
Mrs. Webster.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs.
Aye.
Ms. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye. Ordinance number 2, 2025 passes with 7 affirmative votes. Again, thank you for choosing Springdale. All right, next up, we'll move on to ordinance number 3, 2025. This is a second reading. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 3, 2025, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with Mitchell's Salon and Day Spa Incorporated related to a job creation and retention program agreement. Whereas Mitchell's Salon and Day Spa Incorporated has requested assistance from the city of Springdale, the city, in the form of an incentive to encourage job creation and retention, and whereas the city is willing to provide the requested local incentive pursuant to the terms of a job creation and retention incentive program agreement between Mitchell's Salon and Day Spa Incorporated and the city, the agreement. And whereas the city believes entering into the agreement will bring economic benefits to the city. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring, Section 1, that the mayor and city administrator are hereby authorized to enter into an agreement with Mitchell's Salon and Day Spa Incorporated related to local job creation and retention substantially in the form attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, that the Finance Officer Tax Commissioner is hereby authorized to make payments to Mitchell's Salon and Day Spa Incorporated pursuant to the terms of the agreement. Section 3, council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 4, this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the reading of ordinance number 3, 2025. It is a second reading and can be acted on tonight. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or discussion? All right. Seeing none, Ms. Browder, if you poll council.
Mr. Vanover.
Aye.
Mrs. Sullivan-Meiskop.
Aye.
Mrs. Webster.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs.
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves.
Aye.
Ms. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye. Ordinance number 3, 2025 passes with 7 affirmative votes. All right, next we'll move on to ordinance number 4, 2025. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 4, 2025, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with Salas O'Brien Incorporated related to a job creation and retention program agreement. Whereas Salas O'Brien has requested assistance from the city of Springdale, the city, in the form of an incentive to encourage job creation and retention, and whereas the city is willing to provide the requested local incentive pursuant to the terms of a job creation and retention incentive program agreement between Salas O'Brien Incorporated and the city, the agreement. And whereas the city believes entering into the agreement will bring economic benefits to the city. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, that the mayor and city administrator are hereby authorized to enter into an agreement with Salas O'Brien Incorporated related to local job creation and retention, substantially in the form attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, that the Finance Officer Tax Commissioner is hereby authorized to make payments to Salas O'Brien Incorporated pursuant to the terms of the agreement. Section 3, Council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 4, this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the reading of ordinance number 4, 2025. It is a second reading. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
I think I heard Mr. Gleaves as the second, just by a hair. All right, questions or discussion? All right, seeing none, Ms. Brown, if you poll council.
Mrs. Sullivan Wisecup.
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves.
Aye.
Mr. Vanover.
Aye.
Mrs. Webster.
Aye.
Ms. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye. Ordinance number 4, 2025 passes with 7 affirmative votes. All right, next up on our agenda is a resolution. This is the one that was tabled from our previous meeting to appoint a member to the Tax Review Board. Before we do the resolution reading, I'm going to open the floor for nominations for that position. As in past, we'll do nominations ahead of time. If there's more than one, we'll do a vote. If there's just one by acclamation, we'll add it and then read the resolution with that name in there. So with that in mind, I'm now opening the floor for nominations to serve as a member of the City of Springdale Tax Review Board for the term ending December 31st, 2026. The floor is now open for nominations. Ms. Sullivan Wisecup.
Megan Chapman said that she would like to return.
All right, we have the name of Ms. Megan Chapman. Any other nominations? All right, seeing none, I'm now closing nominations for the position, and then by acclamation, we will go ahead and read Resolution 5, 2025, with the name Megan Chapman inserted in for the blank. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Resolution R5, 2025, a resolution appointing Megan Chapman to serve as a member of the City of Springdale Tax Review Board for the term ending December 31, 2026. Whereas a vacancy occurred on the City of Springdale Tax Review Board for the term ending December 31, 2024, and whereas the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio has determined that Megan Chapman shall be appointed to fill the vacancy and serve as a member of the City of Springdale Tax Review Board for the term ending December 31, 2026. Now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, with members elected thereto concurring, Section 1, that Megan Chapman be and is hereby appointed to serve as a member of the City of Springdale Tax Review Board for the term ending December 31, 2026. Section 2, Council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this Council, and that all deliberations of this Council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3, that this resolution shall take effect and be enforced from and after the earliest period allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the reading of Resolution 5, 2025. It can be acted on tonight. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or discussion? All right, seeing none, Ms. Brown, if you poll council on Resolution 5, 2025.
Mrs. Sullivan Wisecup.
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves.
Aye.
Ms. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs.
Aye.
Mr. Vanover.
Aye.
Mrs. Webster.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye. Resolution 5, 2025 passes with 7 affirmative votes. And Ms. Chapman, if you're watching, thank you for being willing to serve again. We appreciate it. All right, next up we have Resolution 6, 2025. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Resolution 6, 2025, a resolution supporting the Ohio Municipal League's challenge of AT&T's tariff application at the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. Whereas on December 18, 2024, the Ohio Bell Telephone Company, DBA AT&T Ohio AT&T, filed a telecommunications form related to a change in its tariff for construction charges relocation of facilities with the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, the PUCO, in PUCO case numbers 24-1123-TP-ATA and 90-5032-TP-TRF, collectively referred to as AT&T's tariff application. And whereas AT&T's tariff application proposes tariff changes which will require any municipalities in which AT&T is located in the municipality's public right-of-way to pay the full cost of any relocation or undergrounding of AT&T's facilities, regardless of the reason for the relocation. This is in direct contradiction of current Ohio law. And whereas AT&T's tariff application is subject to a 30-day auto-approval process, meaning that if PUCO does not rule on the application, then the application is automatically approved, and the tariff change becomes effective on the 31st day after the filing of the application. And whereas if AT&T's tariff application goes unchallenged and becomes automatically effective, municipalities throughout Ohio and subsequently constituents who may or may not be AT&T customers would be required to pay for any relocation of AT&T facilities in the public rights of way, even if the relocation or undergrounding is required for health, safety, or public welfare purposes. And whereas any challenges to AT&T's application must be filed prior to January 17, 2025 to allow the PUCO to pause the automatic approval process, allow challengers to be heard through an evidentiary hearing, and consider legal arguments. To challenge AT&T's tariff application, an interested stakeholder must file a motion to intervene with PUCO showing that it has a real and substantial interest in AT&T's tariff application, and the intervener is so situated that the disposition of the proceeding may, as a practical matter, impair or impede its ability to protect that interest. And whereas the Ohio Municipal League has engaged counsel to challenge AT&T's tariff application. Now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, with members elected thereto concurring. Section 1. The Council finds that AT&T's tariff application directly changes and significantly impacts, to the detriment of the City of Springdale, how Springdale manages and administers its public rights of way. Section 2. The Council hereby authorizes and agrees to participate and to intervene in the proceeding at the PUCO in order to challenge AT&T's tariff application and any subsequent and/or necessary legal, administrative, legislative efforts. Section 3. The Council has been advised by the Ohio Municipal League that future financial and/or other support from the City of Springdale may be necessary to the success of a challenge to AT&T's tariff application and any related legal, administrative, or legislative efforts. Springdale may take under consideration the specific amount or form of such financial and/or other support from Springdale at a subsequent meeting of this Council. Section 4, Council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this Council, and that all deliberations of this Council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 5, that this resolution shall take effect and be enforced from and after the earliest period allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the reading of Resolution 6/2025. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Question, discussion. I believe Mr. Braun pegged ahead that he wanted to speak. Mr. Braun.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to explain the reason for this and the reason this appeared so suddenly on your agenda. Unbeknownst to many across the state of Ohio, AT&T filed a tariff application with PUCO that essentially would have been an end run around current state law that would have said, they asked for an insertion into the current regulations for PUCO that would have basically said anytime a governmental entity requests the relocation and undergrounding of communications or communication lines, that they were not responsible for paying for the relocation of those. As you know right now, let's just take a project that's on our radar right now, the Northland Boulevard project. Any telephone poles, any communication lines, pick any other project in the city. We notify those individuals, you need to move your lines because, as you know, we own those rights of way. And while the federal government may have intervened and preempted us and said we have to let them locate there, we don't have to let them locate there for free, meaning that when we want those lines moved, they have to move them so that we cannot be impaired in our growth. This would have radically changed the law in Ohio. The Ohio Municipal League correctly and aptly rose up and said we would like as many communities as they can across the state of Ohio to join with us in opposing this. We brought this application to you tonight. In the interest of disclosure, the deadline was actually earlier today to have your name included in the motion to intervene that was filed. The City of Springdale was included in that upon the recommendation of administration. However, I don't think that the battle is over, but I have a footnote to add that the motion to intervene was filed listing many communities across the state of Ohio, including the City of Springdale, at 1:29 today, and by 2:30, AT&T withdrew the application request within an hour and basically said, oh, it was misunderstood. We didn't intend to take it as far as we said in our filing. I think it's significant, though, that this be adopted tonight for two reasons. Number one, we did include the City of Springdale in the motion to intervene, and we want, you know, AT&T and other service providers, whether it be communications, electric, cable, to know that we will exercise our home rule and protect our rights of way when they're under attack. Number two, I don't think that the battle is over. I don't think it was an accident that AT&T asked for this as a test run, and I would not be surprised if this battle is one that we haven't seen the last of. So in the interest of protecting our rights of way and home rule, I think this is a worthy thing for the city to put its name on. And any of us up here, the mayor, Mr. Yule, Ms. Morgan, or myself are familiar with this if you have any questions about it specifically. But I do want you to know that as a formality, they withdrew that request under pressure because of elected officials like you taking a stand. So thank you.
Thank you. And just to be clear, Section 3, we're not, by voting for it, we're not committing ourselves to financing an objection that they refile. That's what Section 3 protects us from, is we understand there might be costs in the future, but we're not allowing those today.
That's correct. Before you would incur those costs, we would come back for another vote. This is more about taking a stand and making a statement. So thank you.
Mr. Gleaves.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Brown, maybe, hopefully you can answer this question. The Ohio Municipal League, who is this entity and what relationship do they have with Springdale?
So the Ohio Municipal League is an entity that represents local governments across the state of Ohio, villages, cities, and even some large urban townships. And what they do is they're an advocacy group. They also provide various benefits. The city of Springdale, are we a member?
Yes.
I think we are officially a member. You don't have to be a member, but we are a member. We receive benefits from that, many that we exercise and many that we don't. But this is one of the most important functions of the Ohio Municipal League is they keep an eye on things in Columbus for us. And they do, just as Mr. Anderson updates us on things that happen in our local OKI meetings, the Ohio Municipal League updates us on bills, laws, even suggestions that are being made, during discussions that could affect local government. So it's a very important, I call it an advocacy group, but it is a trade association, and it is, I think it's a valuable tool that we have to assist us in protecting many things that affect our community.
Thank you very much.
And Mr. Gleaves, just to add to that, I think we've had legislation come in past meetings, I think it's before your time, where we've done things where we've joined letters or petitions as well in these cases as our lobbying group. I think the last one we did was a letter when the state tried to take away some of our zoning ability and change the way that animals would be regulated at the state level. We had written as a community saying that we should be able to determine that ourselves, and that was something that came through our lobbying group as well. So we've done this in the past. All right. Any other questions or discussion? All right, seeing none, Ms. Browder, if you poll council on Resolution R6, 2025.
Mrs. Sullivan-Weiscup.
Aye.
Mrs. Webster.
Aye.
Ms. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs.
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves.
Aye.
Mr. Vanover.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye. Resolution R6, 2025 passes with 7 affirmative votes. All right, next up is the item that we added to our agenda, which was ordinance number 5, 2025, an ordinance to authorize the mayor and city administrator to enter into collective bargaining agreement with the Springdale Professional Firefighters, IAFF 4027, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 5, 2025, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with the Springdale Professional Firefighters, IAFF Local 4027, and declaring an emergency. Whereas the city of Springdale, the city has been in labor negotiations with the Springdale Professional Firefighters, IAFF Local 4027, to reach an agreement on a new collective bargaining agreement. And whereas the current collective bargaining agreement with the Springdale Professional Firefighters, IAFF Local 4027, expired on December 31, 2024. And whereas the city has reached a tentative agreement for a new collective bargaining agreement contingent on the approval of City Council. Be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, that the mayor and city administrator are hereby authorized and directed to execute a collective bargaining agreement with the Springdale Professional Firefighters, IAFF Local 4027, as set forth in the attached Exhibit A, which is incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council, and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 1.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3, that this ordinance shall be an emergency measure necessary for the preservation of the public health, peace, health, safety, and general welfare, and shall, subject to the terms of Article 2D, 3D of the Charter, be effective immediately. The reason for said declaration of emergency is the need to provide the benefits as set forth in the new agreement at the earliest possible date.
Council, you've heard the reading of ordinance number 5, 2025. It does have the emergency clause. What is your pleasure?
Move
Move to adopt.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Questions or discussion? Did you want to add anything to it from administration standpoint? All right. As I understand it, it was unanimously approved by the union.
Yes, they voted last night, and it was unanimous in favor of this agreement. So we do appreciate their professionalism, and also the folks that they brought to the bargaining table were reasonable. And as the mayor stated earlier, this was a fair and sustainable contract moving forward.
All right, and I also add the accolades. I truly appreciate our fire department and first responders. I see a lot of trouble kind of staffing the way that we do and the support that we give and get from them and the community. So I don't take it for granted. So I appreciate the work administration has done to maintain the relationship with our department. It's never seen adversarial, and I think that's a testament to your work as much as their professionalism. So I appreciate both that, the work you do, and certainly the work that they do every day. It is very much appreciated. All right, seeing no other comments or questions, Ms. Browder, if you would poll council on ordinance number 5, 2025.
Mrs. Webster?
Aye.
Mrs. Sullivan Wisecup?
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs?
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves?
Aye.
Mr. Vanover?
Aye.
Ms. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye. Ordinance number 5, 2025 passes with 7 affirmative votes. All right, that's the end of ordinances and resolutions. We'll go ahead and move on to old business. Is there any old business anyone on council would like to bring forward? All right, seeing none, we'll move on is new business. Is there any new business anyone on council would like to bring forward? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to meetings and announcements. Ms. Sullivan Wisecup.
Thank you, Mr. President. Planning Commission will meet in these chambers on February the 11th at 7 p.m.
Ms. McFarland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Springdale Youth Boosters will be holding their annual horse races on February 22nd at the Rec Center.
All right, Mr. Gleaves.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Board of Zoning Appeals will be meeting right here in these chambers at 7 p.m. January 28th.
Mr. Yule.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just two quick announcements. Just as a reminder, Monday, January the 20th, the municipal building will be closed in honor of Martin Luther King, and we will have shortened hours over at the community center. The community center hours will be 1 p.m. to 9 p.m.
All right. Ms. Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Civil Service Commission will meet February 6th at 2 p.m.
All right, seeing no more lights, we'll go ahead and move on. Next, we have communications to the audience. It's your second opportunity to address council for any reason. Just as before, simply come to the podium, state your name and address, and you can address council for up to 5 minutes. The floor is now open for communications from the audience. Second call. Third and final call. All right, I'm closing communications from the audience. Next, we'll move to Mr. Jacobs for a recap of legislative items and legislation and development in the order that works best for him. Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. President. Council, as you review your legislative summary, item 1, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into a business incentive grant agreement with G5 Entertainment LLC was approved with 7 affirmative votes. Item 2 was addressed by Ordinance 4, 2025, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into a job retention and creation incentive program agreement with Salas O'Brien Incorporated. That passed with 7 affirmative votes. Item 3 was addressed by Ordinance 3, 2025, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into a job retention and creation incentive program agreement with Mitchell Salon and Day Spa. That passed with 7 affirmative votes. Item 4 was addressed by Resolution 5, 2025, a resolution appointing Megan Chapman to the City of Springdale Tax Review Board for the term ending December 31, 2026. That passed with 7 affirmative votes. Item 5 was addressed by Resolution 6, 2025, a resolution supporting the Ohio Municipal League's challenge of AT&T's tariff application at the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, also passing with 7 affirmative votes. Council also added Ordinance 5, 2025 with an emergency clause to the agenda, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with Springdale Professional Firefighters, IAFF Local 4027, and declaring an emergency. That also passed with 7 affirmative votes. And that's all I have unless administration has anything forthcoming.
We do have the items from Rules of Law that we want to make sure we start tracking as well. So there's those 2 meetings that were mentioned earlier. So we'll include those in the next report. Any others? All right. All that's left before us then is item 16.
Move to adjourn.
We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.